It's 11:30 on the dot here, and so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome and thank you all for joining us for Leadership Network's latest webinar entitled Fuel Your Multi-Site Launch Strategy. My name is Tim Nations. I serve as one of the directors here at Leadership Network. And I'm really excited that you've chosen to invest the next 55 or so minutes with us as we talk about 3 keys to launching your first campus. And because we want to serve you in your church, not only will you get some great content today, but we'll also be sharing with you how you can get access to additional resources, coaching, and other leaders who are launching their first campuses. More about that at the close of our time today. But just a reminder, we are going to be recording today's webinar, so everyone who's registered will receive a link with that recording following the webinar so you can review the content, share it with your team, etc. But as we get started, I want to cover just a couple of quick housekeeping items with you. You'll notice one of the things that if something's going to go wrong with a webinar, it's probably something related to audio. And so if there's ever an issue with your audio during the webinar, you'll notice the audio controls button there at the top. And so you can adjust your audio there. Also, we're going to be taking your questions via the Q&A feature. And so you can click on the Q&A button, put your questions in there. We'll be answering some of those along the way during the webinar and then at the end as well. If you have any issues, also feel free to put something in there, and if we can resolve it, we'll try and help you with that as well. But leading our webinar today is Leadership Network's Director, Dr. Josh Whitehead. For the past 12 years, Josh has served as Executive Pastor for Faith Promise Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. Faith Promise is a multi-site church with 5 local campuses, an internet campus in Costa Rica, as well as, an international campus in Costa Rica, as well as an internet campus. Josh joined the Leadership Network team a few years ago to lead several of our multi-site experiences, including groups preparing to launch their very first campus. And currently, Josh directs our Hub Multi-Site Jumpstart experience, which I'll say a little bit more about later. But for now, let me just turn things over to Josh to get us started.
Hey, thanks so much, Tim, and thank you, each of you, for being a part of this experience that we get to have together today. And I also want to say thanks to my friend Jerry Hurley for giving us about 50 minutes right now to just actually invest in our churches and church leaders that are a part of this webinar. And I have to be honest, I didn't tell him I was going to say this because he wouldn't have done it, but I truly believe with everything in me that Life Church is one of the most, if not the most, generous church in America. And Jerry has invested in me and just in our team as well. And it's made a huge difference in the way that we do multi-site today. Just probably 18 months ago, since we met and had the opportunity just to learn from he and his team there at Life Church. And so Jerry is responsible for the team and cultural development at Life Church. He leads a ton of different things, and he's been there for a long time. After he transitioned out of the marketplace, he was working at Target in a great level there and doing a lot of work with them, and then ultimately joined Pastor Craig Rochelle to come on staff at Leadership at Life Church to begin really the journey there to help them become the church that they are today. And what I know about Jerry is he's a great leader. He's super humble. He takes no credit for anything that's happened at Life Church, particularly when it's bad. But now I'm joking about that. But nonetheless, he actually is an incredible leader and an incredible part of the directional leadership team there at Life Church. And so, Jerry, thanks so much for being with us today. We really are grateful for the few minutes that we have. And I'm going to jump in in our few minutes. And what we want to do today is talk about 3 different things that are going to fuel your launch strategy. And I think they're really just kind of tweaks on what people probably know. But those simple tweaks, if we really make them a part of our strategy, can actually change multi-site and the way that we do multi-site in the future. That can exponentially make a difference in our church. And so I want to just jump into these and really jump into the first one that I want us to look at today. And what I want to do is talk a little bit in this about our attitude. And 3 keys to launching our first campus. The first one is this: don't just launch one campus, launch one campus with multiple campuses in mind. Now, Jerry, I want to just take a minute and get you to go way back, because obviously you guys have now 26 campuses spread out all across the country, and they're in Oklahoma as well. But you guys were a single site church originally. So talk to us a little bit, and many of us have heard the story of the journey from Pastor Craig, but talk a little bit and just refresh people's memory about how you guys first made that multi-site jump.
Sure. Well, Josh, thanks, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of the webinar. And there's no way I can live up to all the nice things you said about me. And in about 50 minutes, everybody will know that you're exaggerating, but that's a whole other issue. Yeah, you know, Life Church, when I started at Life Church in 1998, it was single site church. And we had a vision to do what most churches did, what most churches still do. And that's just continue to grow in a single location, and would have, and actually planned to do that. We actually planned to build a 4,000 seat auditorium, and we buy 80 acres of land, and we did all of those things, to even plans, had models, all those different kinds of things to have a large single site church. But the problem became that we were growing faster than anybody in their right mind would loan us money to keep up with. And so that constraint forced us then to start thinking, okay, man, what are we going to do? How are we going to meet this need? We've got so many people coming. We don't have room for them. And I imagine a lot of churches that are listening on this webinar today are probably facing a similar issue. They've got, the growth is outpacing their ability to have facilities to accommodate them, and they're looking for solutions. And so were we. And we started in 1999, we started a movie theater service. So we had a movie theater about 6 or so miles away, and that was our first attempt at multi-site. We had video messages and all those different kinds of things set up and tear down. And we did that from 1999 to 2000, and we actually merged with a church. And that gave us our second actual physical location. And then it was along about that time that we kind of recognized, this had been early 2000, that we were supposed to be, God was making it clear to us that we were supposed to be a multi-site church. And that was really kind of the vision that we have. We believe that it was from God. We believe also at the same time, we thought we were kind of alone in that endeavor, but really sprinkled all across the United States about that same time. There was, a dozen or so, maybe even more churches that God was kind of planting that all across the country in different ways. And so we decided that we were going to become a multi-site church, and which is an interesting mindset, because at first you think, well, I'm just going to be a church that does multi-site. But the mindset shift for us in 2000 was we were going to be a multi-site church, which then changed the way that we approached multi-site, changed the approach of what we were doing. And I think it was very critical. That mindset change was critical to everything that you see today actually taking place. So anyway, so that's, then 2 led to 3. And then from there, it just went on and on and on. Today we have 26 campuses in 8 states. Our 27th will open in August.
So let's dig into that shift that has to happen. Now, obviously, the people who are listening in today, most of them haven't launched their first campus yet.
Right.
You were launching campuses, right? So you had launched your first one, just like their desire is. Then you're launching it, and that shift happened. Where did that shift happen? Let's dig into that for just a second. Where did that mindset begin to change, and why is that so important?
Well, I think a lot of people will get into multi-site to meet either a short-term need or a short-term desire. Okay, just because multi-site seems to be a way that we can break through some barriers that we haven't been able to break through before. It does. It's a very appealing option, and I think now 18 years ago nobody was thinking I'm going to be a multi-site church, but now many churches are, and a lot of churches will actually set out to do that. But I would just make sure that before you go down that pathway, that you don't really think about, I like what you say, you don't think about, okay, what is this one that we're going to try to accomplish? Because that might turn to 2 or 3, but eventually you're going to have to change how you approach what you do if you're going to be a multi-site church of 5, 6, 7 campuses. You're just going to have to change the way that you think. You're going to have to change the way that you resource campuses. You're going to have to, you have to just change how you structure the organization. At least in our case, it ended up that way. And as I look at churches, multi-site churches across the country, it seems like that seems to be one of the big catalytic moments, is when people restructure their organization to actually more suit multi-site a multi-site environment. But anyway, so the question is, when you think about launching the one, you should think about, okay, if I was gonna launch 10, what would have to be different if I was going to be a church of 10 versus a church of 2? And for us, how we kind of forced that issue was actually through really one of the big mistakes that we made along the way. And we had probably gotten, this was probably 2003, maybe 2004, and we were 5 or 6 campuses at that point. And we felt that we were going to be, our goal was to launch 50 campuses in 5 years. And that was, we called it 50 and 5. And that was this big thing. And it was incredibly naive at the moment. You know, we look back and just laugh at ourselves today that was but we were bought in, and we were going to accomplish 50 campuses in 5 years. And ultimately that was a huge failure, as far as, because we didn't hit, you know, it's been 10 years and we still don't have 50 campuses. But here's the treasure in the shipwreck, is what I'll call that, right? Is what it forced us to do is it forced us to ask this question. If what we're doing today isn't sustainable at 50 campuses, why are we doing it? If the approach that we're using today won't scale to 50 campuses, can we still use that approach? And so that's just a good thing to ask yourself as you look at your systems, you look at the people that you have, you look at how you're structured, and say, okay, if this won't support 10 campuses, then what are we going to have to change to make it do that, or to allow it to do that? And so that was a pretty catalytic thing for us, and it forced us to build a structure, actually, that we still use today, and that I believe the structure that we have today will scale to, you know, it will scale to 50 campuses for sure. It's just going to take us a little bit to get there.
Yeah, that's right. Well, hey, I think you're doing a great job so far with 26. And, you know, I think that's a great point that so many people miss out on. When I talk to churches that are looking to launch their first campus, many times they're not thinking about how what they do is actually going to impact the way they can accomplish their multi-site vision and strategy. So they're just thinking about, hey, we want to launch another campus. They're not thinking about that their current structure actually can either really enhance or it can limit the strategy of multi-site. And I always go by, hey, I don't get into a real battle of what should you do or what shouldn't you do, right? Because every church, I mean, even from Life Church to Faith Promise, we may focus on some different things in our multi-site, you know, in our church vision, the way that we do church. But it actually enhances or limits the way that we can launch campuses in the future. And again, I don't mean this in a negative way, but if your church focuses on on-site small groups, so if you have small groups in buildings on your campus, to replicate that will actually require you to build or lease or renovate a lot larger spaces in the future if you're going to be a successful multi-site church, or to resource different types of ministry in the future will be more and more difficult. So, hey, unpack just a couple, maybe just one or two. What were some of the hard things that Life Church had to change when you said, hey, we're actually going to do this. We're going to launch 50 campuses, and that's going to be our filter for how we make decisions in the future?
Oh, it was just, well, you recognize, and you hit on that. You recognize, okay, every square foot of building, if you're going to have a ministry model that requires facility space, right? So every classroom you build, every room that you build, every square foot of building that you add to your model, you do a couple of different things. One, you just have to replicate that over and over and over again if you're going to have a replicatable model, which is what every church that's going to be multi-site should wrestle with at some point, is what is the model that we're going to move forward with? In other words, are they going to all kind of be similar and all have the same teaching and the same way and concurrent and all those different kind of things? Are you going to have a model that's replicatable from one to the other? If you're going to do that, you have to define what that model looks like, which takes a lot of discipline and effort, right? Because everybody kind of wants to do something different, particularly when you early on in multi-site. It's like a really small church. It takes a lot more leadership interaction with a church of 150 to get everybody on the same page than it does for a church of 15,000, because the expectation of the attender is different. Their expectation of their ability to influence is different, right? So early on in multi-site, you have campus pastors and campus leaders, and they all, early on, they all have the sense that they should influence the overall direction, which is fine. But somebody has to ultimately decide, what is this church going to look like? What is this church going to feel like? And so all of those things, you just have to realize, if you're going multi-site, every square foot of building, every ministry expense, every staff member that you have, you just have to multiply that times whatever it is. And so, you know, when you think about it, it's a good thing to think about. Even if you haven't launched your first one yet, think about, what's the staffing model look like, and will it sustain at 26 campuses? You know, so headcount matters. And so every, you know, and for where we are today, if I add headcount at every campus, immediately it's well over $1.5 million just in what that means to add headcount at a campus. So you just have to think about those things, and you don't always think about when you're just adding one. But if you let your mind go a little bit further and actually plan ahead and actually begin to think about those things as you start the journey, it is so much easier to shape it as you go rather than fix it when it breaks.
That's so good. And, you know, that's even a reminder, even in my context, I remember some of those difficult conversations. And I think most people think, you know, for you guys, for a life church, you know, it's just not hard. You just change something, but you labor over those changes of what are the right changes to make. And we had a men's ministry that was happening when we were launching our first multi-site campus, and we decided that's not something that we can replicate in the future. We said, what are we replicating? Small groups. And we said, okay, well, those are going to become small groups in our original campus model and our future campus model. And that's one thing that I've realized, is that a lot of times churches err on the side of, hey, we'll keep all the things we want at our original campus, and then we'll multiply the things out that we want to be somewhere else. And we figured out, hey, it doesn't work that way. We're one church in multiple locations. And so we said, hey, all of us will become men's small groups in that context, right? Instead of this ministry and this large meeting and breakfast and all of these other things. And man, you talk about a really difficult transition for people to grasp a hold of. And you would think, well, no, it seems so simple. You just transition to be small groups, right? But no, everyone had bought into a model, and now we were changing that model for them in the future. And so if you don't think that through, you'll end up with different campuses, I think, which is what you were alluding to. If you let campuses do things differently, then you can't resource those campuses either in the future, because the things that they need are different as you move forward. So that's a great point. Now, I want to remind you guys that you can actually type in questions there in the Q&A box there on your screen at the bottom. And if you have a question for Jerry in this area or any of the other areas, if you'll type it in there, we'll try to do our best to get to it. Now, let's finish up here in just the next couple of minutes. And Jerry, talk to me a little bit about, what is Life Church learning right now about launching campuses in the future that might be helpful just to expand the vision of the church leaders that are with us today?
Oh, wow. What are we learning right now? Man, a lot of different things we're learning right now. You know, I think the fundamental thing that we've learned along the way is that I think is the most important thing, is that the only way to build a church is a life at a time. And it doesn't change. And we have tried to, at one point, we tried to market our way to a church. We tried to do a lot of different things that were well-intentioned in the moment, but God just kept bringing us back to, if you're going to build this, you're going to do it a life at a time, a story at a time, a person at a time. And so as long as you stay focused on that, I'll just say this, it keeps us grounded. It keeps us grounded and focused on the right kinds of things, doing the right kinds of ministry, connecting with people. And that's really the focus for us. So it doesn't matter, you know, people would probably be surprised at how little we spend on marketing. And because we just realized that, you know what, we're going to create a culture of the people that attend to invite friends. We're always going to be a place where it's a great Sunday to go to church. It's a great place to bring a friend. It's a great place to invite a family member. And so for us, that's just the thing that there's a lot of different strategies you can use. Just never lose sight of the fact that you're going to build them a person at a time.
That's great. So, hey, let's look at let me give you a couple questions here that are coming in from our folks that are joining us today. So here's a great one. This one I think you can answer pretty quickly. What if your staff hasn't bought into the vision of Multisite?
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop by saying, well, you need a new staff, because that's not true. I mean, right? You just have to, here's what I'll say. Here's what I will say. The fact of the matter is for some of them, that may be true.
Right.
And some of them are going to have, if you're really leading in that direction, the first thing I do as a leader, I would make sure that I'm casting the vision clearly, compelling vision, articulated clearly, so that people understand the why behind what it is that we do and how they fit into it. All right. So I'll just go on our own experience. When we actually completely, in 2003, we completely redid our structure I was the executive pastor of Life Church. And so you had a traditional structure that way. And then we blew my role up into 3 different roles, and we spread it out, and we actually built an organizational structure that looks much more like what I used to at Target than what you would find at a traditional church. Right. Mm-hmm. And so we took our team, what we said is, everybody on this team has a place today. And we set the org chart, and we did our best. We did interviews to put people in the role that suited them the best and that they felt the best about being in, right? Yeah. But what we recognized is there were some people, like I had a great youth pastor at that time. That youth pastor felt called to youth in Oklahoma City. He didn't feel called to youth in Tulsa. Or he didn't feel called to youth in Stillwater, didn't feel called to youth in Albany, New York, whatever. So we came to a crossroads where, his vision for his ministry and our vision for our ministry just were different. Mm. And so we just had to recognize that. And he ended up leaving our team in a great way. And it was we love him today. I'm still friends with him today. But those things are going to happen. And so as you make decisions to go multi-site and you bring people along, one thing I have to realize is you try to make room for everybody, but at the end of the day, it won't be for everybody. And 2 lessons God showed me early on is that not every great person is supposed to be part of our team, right? And not every great person is supposed to be part of our team forever. Mm. You're not a great person. It just means that they just aren't supposed to be part of our team anymore sometimes.
That's so good.
You can't change that. So anyway, so to that end, I would just lead with vision, and then to the extent that people won't follow, at some point there'll be a crossroads.
That's right. So hey, here's a tough one. Steve asked as well. Someone in their church, one of their small groups asked, why would we go into a community and hurt another church by being a multi-site church? How would you answer that?
Well, it's a great question, and I won't. I realize that sometimes when Life Church goes into another community, that churches there sometimes are apprehensive about us coming there. But what I honestly believe is that we were. First of all, here's how we would approach that. First of all, when we go to a community, one of the questions that we ask is there a church that ministers the way that Life Church ministers in that community? Right? It doesn't mean there's not great churches, but they're just going to do things differently and reach a different group of people. So, and generally, if the question is yes, there's already somebody like Life Church doing that, then we will probably not go into that community. That's going to be one of the things that we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. But generally, there is enough people that aren't going to church to where it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And then what we try to do, and we've kind of learned a little bit the hard way, and I'm not going to say that we always do a fantastic job, but we do work hard at building relationships with the churches in the community that we're at. Good. And even in Oklahoma City, where we've got one of our largest campuses, right down the road, literally, our neighbor is one of the largest Baptist churches in the country. And they've grown essentially right beside us. And they haven't hurt us, we haven't hurt them. In fact, I think that we've actually helped in some ways.
Yeah, that's good. And, I think it's also helping, there's sometimes where where I've even tried in our context to meet with someone to talk to them about, some, their challenges with us coming into a community. I don't do that ever anymore because it's very rarely fruitful. But one of the things I try to help pastors understand, and I think this is important, is that so often we're fear-based over faith-based, right? And I think in any of those contexts, it's about the kingdom. And if we could fill up, if Life Church could fill up every one of their services at every one of your service times, there would still be more unchurched people in your communities than you could reach. And the same for every church in America today. And so I think it's really encouraging other churches to become effective at reaching their communities is an important part of that. Hey, really quickly, and we're gonna transition. Do you guys market in the communities that you're going to? So do you ever do advertising or any type of campaigns when you're going into a community?
Yes, we do. We have tried a lot of different things in the past. We've tried television, we've tried infomercials, we've tried those different kind of things. Honestly, for us, we didn't actually see the return on investment on television, so we have elected not to go that route. I know it works for a lot of places, but actually what we have found that works best is just enhancing our social media game. There is a benefit to as Life Church's footprint continues to grow. There are more connection points. In other words, people in, if we're going to go into Kansas City, for example, there was more people that knew people from Oklahoma and Kansas City, friends, family. You're just able to build a core group faster that way. But we've just used social media quite a bit in some of our social media campaigns. We found that to be one of the more effective ways to go about doing it. And then we use our church online campus as well.
That's good.
Online campus to help kind of identify where people are and where they're watching from, and that gives us some opportunities to connect with people that we wouldn't connect with otherwise.
It's good. So don't just launch one campus. Launch with one campus with multiple campuses in mind. You right. Truly will help yourself a ton if you launch thinking, okay, we're gonna be a multi-site church and launch with multiple campuses. The second thing is, don't look for one campus pastor. Develop campus pastors. Now, if there is someone that I respect for developing people, Jerry, you are that guy, man. You have that's been really what your ministry and even your career at some level has been about, is development. And so, I think that's great. So here's my first question for you. What would you do differently if you were developing your first campus pastor again? So go way back when Life Church, launched that first campus, and knowing what you know today, what would you do a little differently?
Well, I think the first mistake that we made, first of all, the campus pastor that we hired to be our first campus pastor actually still works for Life Church. He's not a campus pastor, but he's an incredible part of our team. So that's just interesting.
Yeah.
But the mistake that we made with our first campus pastor, that we thought we needed kind of an MC, right? Somebody that could present a message and could have some stage time, and really we were kind of looking for somebody to just facilitate the interaction of Craig on the screen and people, and then responding to people's needs, those different kind of things. And what we underestimated was the need for that person to be in their own right an incredible leader. All right. And so we know now that we need somebody that can have instant credibility with folks. They can inspire people to action via communication. They can identify high capacity leaders, and they can lead and develop a team. All right. So if the other things are a given, obviously relationship with Christ, that's a given, right? They have to be passionate about our ministry. That's a given. But outside of that, if they can inspire people from as a communicator, if they can effectively lead a team, and they can identify and develop leaders, they have a pretty good chance at being successful in the role of a campus pastor. But they've got to be a leader that is instantly credible.
That's good. And so, one of the things that you guys have done a phenomenal job at is you've really created an exceptional development process. And I know that's changed a little bit over the years, but what I want to do is I want to focus a little bit on something that you shared with me a couple years ago that has been so helpful. And it's the attributes of a potential campus pastor. Now, I know that these have changed some in the way that you focus on them, but you really look at 4 different areas in these attributes. And I'm gonna throw them out there, and then we're gonna walk through them. So just real quickly, they're personal leadership, team leadership, campus leadership, and then organizational leadership. And what I want to do is let's just move to the next slide and look at the personal the personal leadership thought, and give us some insight there as you're looking for campus pastors. What are you looking for in their personal leadership?
Well, I'm looking for, what I would look for is in our organization, I'd look for somebody that's emotionally intelligent, that is self-aware, that, if you look at this on the bullet point, that's on our annual review. They have to exceed expectations. They've got to have a proven track record of operational excellence within their current ministry. So right now, all of our pastors at our campuses, we have typically 6 different pastor roles at our campuses. All right, so you have operations pastor, a worship pastor, first impressions or host team pastor, life group submissions pastor, kids pastor, and a youth pastor, and then you have the campus pastor. Right, so there's 7, and that basic staffing structure is at all of our campuses have those. And so then all of those positions, all of those pastors, what we recognized is that to be successful at any one of those positions, kids pastor, youth pastor, worship pastor, whatever, you have to demonstrate these things that we've talked about. You have to show that you have excellence in the ministry that you're at. You've got to have high levels of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. You've got to be able to lead from the front. You've got to be able to identify high capacity leaders. So what we kind of recognized is there's not as much difference between a worship pastor, a great worship pastor, and a great kids pastor in our context, right? What makes them successful in our context is really transferable. Mm-hmm. So what we ended up doing is recognizing that the pipeline for campus pastors is all of those pastoral positions. So we call it developmental alignment. So when we stopped looking at positional development and looked at development like this, expectation and attributes and skill sets, then what we realized then is that all of those positions can become campus pastors. And we literally have we have campus pastors today that have come through in every single one of those positions.
Yeah. And I think that thought alone is honestly worth everything in the webinar, because I think many people spend a lot of their time looking at how do I develop this role? How do I develop a children's pastor, a student pastor? And you guys really just have simplified that. And I love it because you've raised the bar as well. Hey, we want to develop everyone like basically they're the greatest leader that we have at each campus. And I mean, how can you go wrong with that at some level? You know what I mean? If every person on your staff could be a campus pastor today, you could launch a lot of campuses. Actually, you could hit the 50 goal pretty easily. And
yeah, it is. And our deepest bench right now, pipeline-wise, because all of these roles feed into our campus pastor, they align developmentally into that role, then right now we could launch. I've got campus pastors ready in the organization for 7 new campuses.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have money for 7 new campuses, but I've got that leader. And I don't have enough bench around those. But our deepest bench right now, and has been for the last few years, is our campus pastor bench.
Okay, so I mean, that's a great. I just think your model here is something that churches can pivot on, because I think many of us, myself included, until you really influenced me on this, is how do we develop each group? And what you've done really too is you've created a common language that your organization can share. That everyone, you don't need a common language for kids, a common language for students, a common language for host team. You just have a common language that says this is what leadership means to Life Church. Yeah. And that's what I think is so critical as well, is that it may not be simple in accomplishing what each of those are, but it's simple in actually knowing what they are, because they're the same for your role. So let's look at the next one and throw those up there, team leadership, and just give some of the points underneath that. And so talk just really quickly about team leadership.
All right. So this is when we're looking for the person's ability to lead a team. So that's it. Personally direct and lead part of the campus team. In other words, that because when you become, these are what we call associate campus pastor, right? So the associate campus pastor for us can be any one of the pastors that I talked about earlier. And the associate campus pastor is a designation. So in their role now, they are recognized for having these attributes of leadership. And it's also recognized then that their leadership influence on that campus has grown beyond just their specific ministry role, right? And so this is one of the ways you track record for developing members of a team. Could be volunteers, it could be part of the paid team. They're a strong contributor to their overall campus team. In other words, they're thinking about more, and they've contributed in a way that's beyond just the scope of their ministry, which is great, because oftentimes people can become siloed a bit. But if your mindset is, hey, to be successful in this organization, at this church, I'm going to have a perspective that's broader than just what I'm responsible for. Yeah. And that's an empowering thing. People enjoy that. It adds value and to their role. People feel value. And then the ability to take on more responsibility is another one too. They've got to have gotten to the point where they're just not trying to just kind of keep up with what they've got going. They've kind of become to the point where they've mastered their own area of responsibility, and now they can take on more. Again, right. So when you think about you have a couple hundred pastors at different campuses thinking about these kinds of things, that becomes an incredibly powerful motivator in and of itself for people there. The other thing I think it's important, Josh, to recognize is it's also important for us. It's important for us to realize two things. It's important for us to have a clearly identified pathway to campus pastor in a multi-site church, because the campus pastor is in many ways the backbone of the multi-site church, right? Right. But you also need to be able to recognize and appreciate and value heroes in every role. And by that, I mean that if somebody wants to be a youth pastor or somebody wants to be a kids pastor, and that's what they want to do, there has to be able to be enough value in that role and be valuable enough and feel valuable enough in that role to where that can be a long-term pursuit. And so this associate campus pastor thing can do that as well, because even if I want to just be a life kids pastor for my career, there's enough way as a life kids pastor to influence the organization in a positive way. And actually even compensation and some of those different kind of things to where it could be something I could be excited about for the long term. So we try to accomplish both of those two things.
Well, I think if I recently understood what you said, and we may get to this in a second, but even some of these folks could be leading other staff at a campus because they've elevated to such a level that, and again, I think that's breaking a mold as well for you guys. Often we, as church leaders, we try to stay away from that. And you guys have just kind of broken that mold and said, hey, if you're a developing leader, you're growing into just to become a more and more exceptional leader, we're not going to just put you over to the side and say, hey, we'll be ready for you one day. We're going to give you opportunity now to have influence over different parts of our organization. And I think that's a key part of what you guys have been able to accomplish and why you can continue to see that growth. And then the other thing that you and I talked about recently is momentum. And people thinking this way at every location creates momentum. In most of our churches, we have a small group of people who think this way or who lead this way. And it's hard to push that out to 26 campuses from Oklahoma City if only you and the members of your directional leadership team are thinking this way. Sure. But if at every campus, your whole team is thinking this same way with these same thoughts, you're going to be able to create momentum in such a different way than if you were holding all of that in your office building there in Oklahoma City. And so that's a great reminder. All right, let's look really quickly. Campus leadership is another one of the areas, and let's throw those points up there and just give us some quick interaction there.
And this comes the ability again. So now I've got, I've led myself and I've led my team. Now then my leadership has got to extend beyond that. It's got to be able to extend to the whole campus, because if I'm a campus pastor and I'm going to leave the keys to the campus with my associate, and you can have more than one associate on the campus, by the way, because it's not limited. It's based on a person's ability and their point of development. It's not a structural positional thing at all. It's a developmental recognition. So I've got to be able to communicate from stage to the weekend audience. I've got to be able to inspire large groups of people to action. I've got to have a track record of leading teams and leading through teams now. And then I've got to be perceived as a leader by the people that attend the campus.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a couple different things. It's not just the attenders, but it's also the staff that's there has to view me as a leader, right? And a leader that they could see themselves following. And so that's another piece of it. And so what these things spark is all kinds of discussion about leadership, about development, about personal development, about how I am growing as a leader. Then and so what happens is, instead of having a leadership pipeline or leadership program, right, that's relatively narrowly focused, and whenever I go to conferences from time to time, and people will always talk about their high potential track or their leadership development track. And we got 10% in our development track. And I'm like, okay, that's great. You've got 10, maybe even 20% in this the leadership track. What about the other 80%? Right? And so what this allows us to do is to build a development culture. And you are always talking about, how am I doing? How am I growing? How am I progressing? How am I leading? How am I learning? Which is a really powerful thing.
That's right. Last one is organizational leadership. Right. And that, again, is another component level. And so talk about that just really, really briefly. I'm going to throw some more questions at you.
Okay. So what has to happen is, what we do is when we always look at leaders as to how they're perceived. In other words, I'm not going to give a leader an associate campus pastor designation and hope everybody else, they can grow into it. What I want to see is, are they already perceived that way, and are they already operating that way? And this is just a recognition of how they're already perceived. But that is one of the things we do. We want to make sure that they're perceived as a leader, not only by their campus team, by peers at other campuses, have to view that person as a leader and view that person in that light. And then our central teams have to view that person in the same way. And so what happens is, the only way to become an associate campus pastor is to be nominated by somebody else. Typically, your campus pastor will nominate you. And then for it to actually be approved, it has to be approved at the highest level of the organization. So it really is a significant accomplishment when that happens. And it's something to aspire to.
Well, and that's also great too, because when someone else nominates you, they have skin in the game as well for your success. And what a great thing to have at all of your campuses. You have someone else who's bought in, who says, hey, I'm going to actually be able to change our church because I'm developing this person to help send them out as well. And so you've got skin in the game on the development of these future campus pastors. So that's really, it's so great. So few questions. I'm going to answer a couple of them here just to help, because some of them I think for you guys will be a little bit different. Chris asked, is there a number you must have before launching more than one or more campuses? What's a critical mass? We did some research on this at Leadership Network a few years ago, and there's a resource that's available. It was a Multisite informational piece that we released. You can find it on our website if you go on and look at the Multisite resources. But it was done with Generis, and it tells a lot of information about how many people do churches normally have when they launch their first campuses, and then how much critical mass do they have when they launch as well. But what I'm finding today, even though Life Church is an example of launching really large campuses, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's that Life Church has the opportunity just to reach people at a different level. But I'm seeing now at Leadership Network churches of 1,000, churches of 1,200 that are actually launching effective multi-site campuses that are life-giving, that accomplish vision and mission. And so I would really encourage, leaders that you guys are a part of something significant in a movement. Pastor Craig will often talk about, we're not praying for revival, we're living in revival. I listen to him say that often. I think it's just a great statement, and God's blessed you guys. And so there's some resources there that would help as well. And then, hey, one quick question. So you're all video campuses, and your campus pastors do get to preach, but it less than probably 3 or 4 times a year. Is that correct?
Well, it's 2 to 3 times a year, probably. Yes.
2 to 3 times. So here's my question: How How are you guys able, Ashlyn actually asked this question, how can you still empower the campus pastor to shepherd and lead the campus from a pastoral position if they're not speaking?
Well, first of all, they do communicate every week from stage, right? In other words, what we say, people ask us all the time, do your campus pastors really have to be that strong a communicator because they don't teach all the time, right? I say, here's the thing. Imagine, Craig's got 28 minutes of stage time every week to get his point across. Campus pastor's going to do it in about 9, all right? Maybe less. And so you have to be very thoughtful, very intentional. And our campus pastors have done an incredible job of becoming the pastor, leader, shepherd in a very limited time of communication, but it is very well thought out. And our campus pastors spend an inordinate amount of time relative to the actual time they're on stage preparing that communication, because it's got to be thoughtful, it's got to be on point, it's got to be impactful. And so I would just say that in some ways our campus pastors have developed even stronger communication skills because they have to do it in such a short amount of time and be effective at it.
That's good. Hey, another one really quickly. Do you identify high capacity leaders from personal interaction with them, from seeing them? I think you hit on that a little bit at the end, but just give us a real brief one on, how do you actually find the folks that you're getting into this process that are ultimately getting in this pipeline to be campus pastors?
Well, here's the thing, and I'm gonna kind of backtrack just a little bit, but really it goes to this group of people, which is I always love intersecting with people when they haven't launched their second site yet, because what you have the opportunity to do is you have the opportunity to set the table properly, right? So you can avoid things like allowing different human systems to kind of spark. In other words, right now, hopefully your churches, you're hiring people based on your values in a consistent way across the board, right? And so carry that through. So what we use at Life Church is we use a values-based approach to finding people. Right. And so people do ask me all the time, how do you get Life Church DNA into your people on your team? Which is the wrong question to ask. The right question or the way we do it is we find people, only add people to the team that exhibit Life Church DNA.
Boy, that's good.
But you have to know what your DNA is. You have to know what it looks like. You have to know what it sounds like. And so people have come from Life Church from literally every denomination, probably a couple of cults along the way, every part of the country, they've become part of our team. So it's just a great melting pot. But they all exhibit some very key values that we think are important. And the way we came up with those values is we looked at people that were thriving in our organization, people that were thriving at Life Church, and what are some attributes? Things like work ethic, humility, teachability, sense of humor, self-awareness. Those are just some of those things. And so we go to look for people. We look for people that exhibit our values. And then once you do that, and we do that for every position, whether you're part-time, full-time, central campus, we use the same methodology to bring people on the team, which then helps, again, consistency along the way. And so that's how we would approach that, is we hire for those values and then we develop leaders from there.
Wow. That's, man, what an incredible thought. We find the people who exhibit the values, right? We don't need to get the values inside of them. That's just such a phenomenal thought. Well, hey, we're going to give Tim Nations just a minute to talk about some of the programming, because we actually have people like Jerry who help launch campuses in our hub process. And so, Tim, before we hit our last point, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Let me talk to you. At the beginning, I mentioned about getting some additional resources, coaches, and getting connected with other multi-site leaders as you launch your first campus. As many of you know, Leadership Network has spent more than 25 years working with churches like Life Church, some of the most innovative and influential churches in the world. And one of the things that we've learned in that time is that a single shot in the arm won't bring about the change that you need to move to the next level. Books, courses, consultants, conferences, they have value. But if you really want to see exponential change and growth in your church, especially in an area like multi-site. You need more than that. And so we believe that Hub is going to be the answer for some of you. Hub is a different process. It's 3 gatherings over a 12-month experience for teams that put you on a journey with other creative teams, with recognized experts in the area of multi-site and the leadership network team to address the challenges and opportunities specific for your church. The Hub is about helping you achieve progress over time. We don't just throw ideas at you and send you on your way, but our team walks alongside you and your team as you explore new ideas and models, as you gain insights into what will work for your church, and as you identify and prioritize the next steps for you and your team. And so Hub Multisite Jumpstart is a specific experience designed for churches that are looking to launch their first campus within the next 12 to 18 months. And what it'll do, it'll help you to create action plans and measure results around 3 critical areas for launching your first campus. One is developing a customized roadmap and launch guide for that first campus. The second is creating the right organizational structure to support the growth of your church and your team. And then finally, providing the tools to evaluate your launch and correct things that didn't go as planned. Now, one of the things that we say is that Hub isn't for everyone. In fact, we take teams through an application and interview process to ensure that it's the right fit for your team and that we have the right mix of teams in the room to give the best experience possible for everyone involved. But the first step is to spend some time talking with Josh about where you are now in planning for your first campus. And so in just a few minutes at the end of the webinar, we're going to tell you how to do that. Our next Hub Multisite Jumpstart group is launching this October, and we're only accepting a limited number of teams for that launch. But because you're attending the webinar today, I can tell you how to get a little bit of a jump on things. So more about that in a second. Let's turn it back to Josh and Jerry to talk about our last point.
Hey, real quick, Josh, one thing I think it's important that just even understand how Leadership Network was really critical to us. And when we talked about the decision to go and change our structure, decision was made at a Leadership Network where they brought 12 multi-site churches together, and we worked together to do that. So there's a lot of different ways that went Leadership Network early on when we were going through that 12 multi-site churches, kind of going through that process for a couple of years. It was critical for us. And so I just saying that to say there's a lot of value in what Leadership Network does.
Thanks, Jerry. That means so much. So let's talk really quickly about finances. And the statement I want us to process is, don't raise money for one campus launch. Create a budget that funds campus launches. Now, everyone in the church world, that knows the name Life Church believes that money doesn't matter, right? They believe you guys just have more. I mean, you created the YouVersion Bible app, for goodness sake. You guys just have to have money coming from everywhere. And the reality is, you said just a few minutes ago, you have 7 campus pastors ready to launch campuses, and you don't have the resources today to launch those campuses. And so I think we broke the myth a little while ago that, Life Church is just printing money there in Oklahoma City, right? That it's just not true. But you guys have done a couple of critical things to actually be able to launch multiple campuses and to continue to launch campuses. So talk about that. Let's not talk about the early days and how you work, but let's talk about now. How have you guys created a system in your general budget that allows you to launch campuses in the future?
Right. One of the things that I just want to say is first of all, whether you launch your first one or not, you have to make sure that you maximize the resources that you currently have, right? So before I launched our second campus or our 28th campus, I'd want to make sure are we making the most of what we are? Is what we have being maximized already? Because this is an important part of multi-site. Multi-site is going to it comes out of margin. All right. If you don't have margin, resource margin, if you don't have leadership margin, if you don't have people margin, then you're not going to be able to grow multi-site. So what that means is you're going to have to find a way to create margin. All right. You're going to have to find a way to either grow the top line or you're going to have to find a way to become more efficient in what you do. And so model does matter in those things. So for us, what we just have to do over and over and over again is just say, okay, how can we and where can we create margin so that we can grow? One of the big focuses for us this year is how are we going to increase margin? And that means looking at expenses. That means making sure we're efficient, and that also means how are we going to grow giving at our different campuses.
Yeah.
And all of those things are really, really important to Multisite. But Multisite is going to come out of your margin. So if you've got to find a way to create it, and then you got to find a way that it sustains. And so it's in every little small decision that you're in. You've already talked about some. It goes back to, how does your model expand from 1 location to 2 locations to 3? Keeping in mind as you're making those decisions, margin has to be, efficiency has to be one of those things that you consider, because that's where Multisite's going to come from.
Yeah. And so in your guys' model, you actually have a percentage of every dollar that comes to Life Church goes to launching campuses. Isn't that correct?
Here's what we would do. Here's how I would put that differently.
Okay.
We're going to make sure that we have margin from every dollar that we can then use as God presents opportunities.
That's great.
So it's not just campuses, because the YouVersion Bible app would never have happened if there wasn't some margin to squeeze towards that, right? And so similarly, many of the other initiatives so we would say planning campuses is kind of the key expression for us in growing, but we just want to be kind of in our long-term plan is we're going to be in the ready position. We're going to be ready with margin to respond to what God brings our way. And that's our mindset. So we have a long-term plan. We just are going to say we're ready to take advantage of opportunities that God brings our way.
That's right. And it's just a myth to believe that churches like Life Church just have all of the resources that are available. You have to manage your expenses. You have to manage your staff. You have to manage, every bit of operations, just like a single site church does. And actually, you have really, at your guys' level, you have to manage it so much more, so much more closely in the fact that, like you said earlier, just adding one position, adds more than most churches' yearly budget if you were to do that across your campuses. And so, a little decision times 26 equals a lot of resources that are required to make that become a reality.
And that's true. Dollars matter, but the more campuses you have, pennies matter. And then pretty soon, because we'll measure cost of ministry down to the penny. And it matters, and we can, and so those things, pennies do matter.
That's good.
But there's 2 tensions here too, and the tensions are efficiency on one hand and effectiveness, right? Those are 2 great tensions, and then the other great tensions you're going to have in Multisite is flexibility and control. In other words, how much flexibility do you give each campus, and how much control do you exert centrally? And those are 2 great tensions, and you don't try to keep them static because they move. But if you're going to go Multisite, you've got to address and be comfortable with the tension in both of those 2 things.
That's good. So, hey, we're going to take one more minute, rapid fire here really quickly. How long do you have to have been on staff at Life Church to become a campus pastor?
Oh, we have hired in the past. We have hired people directly into the role of campus pastor.
Right.
So we have done that, some successfully, some not so successfully.
Right.
We've got to a point where our pipeline's big enough to do that. There's not a set time. It's going to depend on somebody. I think somebody could probably, very talented person, could move through that process. And now, depending on how rapidly we're launching them, 2-3 years probably. To come into the organization, become acclimated, and then move through. But there's not anything that would say that somebody couldn't come in, very talented, that couldn't do that in less time if all the opportunities kind of worked itself out. So there's not a set time period. It's more outcome-based than time-based.
Right. And then Steve asked, does Life Church rent or purchase when opening a new location? And I know the answer to that is that early on you did rent. Isn't that correct? Or lease?
We do. We leased, just for kind of whatever it takes, honestly. You know, we've been portable to permanent. We have leased before, where we only have one leased facility now left. But man, it's just whatever opportunity presents itself that makes sense. I would take advantage early on. I would take advantage of leased opportunities for sure. You know, I tell people all the time, it's easy to birth a campus. I mean, it's easy to make a baby. Raising kids is something different. Yeah. And so you just always got to think about that from the long term. But I just take advantage of the opportunities. I don't know that lease or purchase, it could work, and I would grow is what I would do. What do I got to do to grow, and let that then and then just look for opportunities that make sense.
That's great. Hey, Jerry, there's been so much this time has just flown by because of the opportunity that you've given us just to learn from Life Church. And I'll just reiterate what I said before. Life Church truly is, if not one of the most generous churches out there. And you've obviously just represented that well today, and the investment that you've made in these churches. And I just want to thank you for that, for the few minutes that you've given us out of your schedule, and really for modeling, not just that you lead development at Life Church, but that you're a developer. And I think so often people think, well, you're leading development, you're telling other people what to do. No, you're a person who does that. You actually practice and model developing other people, and that's been a picture today. So thank you. We're grateful, and I'm really appreciative that you took the time with us today. Tim, why don't you close it out for us?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Just real quickly to let you know what's going to happen after the webinar. You guys are going to get an email with a link to today's recording, so you can access that, share that, whatever you need to do with that. But you're also going to get another email with information on how to connect with Josh regarding your first campus launch. That email will have information on Hub Multisite Jumpstart, a group that's launching this October. And as I mentioned earlier, space for this group is limited. So if you want to get a jump on the process, immediately after the webinar is over, you'll be redirected to our Hub Multisite Jumpstart page. At the top of the page, you'll see a button that says Get Started. So click on that button, complete the brief form, and we'll be able to get in touch with you right away to get you more information on being a part of that group. So on behalf of the Leadership Network team, thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.